your introductions. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Luke.
All right, thanks everyone for spending some time with us. And I'm actually excited that we got a good group here today. We'll try to make this as interactive as possible so that you're not just hearing me talk for 40 minutes. But my name's Luke Summerfield, and I have kind of a Superman Clark Kent life that I live. One half of it is I work for HubSpot as a go-to-market lead on the product team. The product that I run is our CMS hub, is our business unit. And so before that, I worked at an agency. And so we worked with many vendors and built relationships there. So I got to see the world from the agency side. And after about 3.5 years, that agency got acquired. And I jumped to my adventure at HubSpot, where I started in the partner program. I got hired without a role, without a job title. They just knew I had a background in agency and I could probably do something cool with our partners. So I was tasked at figuring out how to help them grow. Spent some time doing that and did a little tour of duty all around HubSpot, from our partner program to our marketing team, to our academy team, to our developer ecosystem program, to now on the CMS. So the other side of my life is Key, which is a startup, early stage startup for helping creators grow thriving education businesses. And part of that education business is community. So community is something I'm very passionate about and had an opportunity to help grow and be involved in, both through the HubSpot side, but also outside as well. So I'm hoping that I can share some interesting perspectives as someone who's been at an agency, someone who works in SaaS and has worked at a company that has strong partner programs and grown a number of those. And at the same time, someone who's thinking about the technology that powers communities. Oh, we got you on mute, Alex.
Yeah, there's a truck outside, so I'm going to go on and off mute. Sorry about that. But I was experimenting with Key as well. And, you know, there's a lot of different things going on in community right now. There's a whole growing ecosystem of analytics tools that we can talk about. There's obviously what's going on with Slack. Slack's making some big product changes. There's pros and cons with everything. We use a platform called Mighty Networks because we can white label it. You can sort of ride the coattails of a growing community ecosystem like Key.org. So I am interested in understanding from an agency first perspective, because that's most of our partners. We're talking about agencies, but we also have developer API integration type partnerships as well. But let's talk first about the agency persona and some of the things while you're developing Key, when you're looking at this as cost benefit, but you have to get engagement and you have to know that there's going to be people in there doing stuff. What are some of the things that you think about from the tech side of things, both on the product side, but also on the ecosystem side, to make sure that you're building something agencies will like, that you're presenting something they will actually engage with? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question for any community, right? Why would we build a community if we don't get people together to engage? And I think when I think of community in general, regardless of the platform you choose, there's two ways to look at it, two lenses to evaluate why should I do a community. The first is quite honestly, and it's like in this day and age of analytics and being so rational all the time, it's actually probably the most important ingredient of community, which is the human lens. That we as humans have a need for connection, that we have a need to be social and work together to benefit the group, that we have relationships that this day and age is harder than probably ever to sometimes form new relationships when we're all virtual. And so, you know, and ultimately just the want and desire to actually love and care for the people that are excited about what you're doing and part of what you're doing to help them succeed and grow. And so I think when we think of why do a community, that's the first place that I encourage people to think about, is the human side of it and helping each other grow better together. And the other angle is the business lens, right? So all of us work for a business, or on the hook to generate certain results. And how can we think about community as a lever in getting to those results faster, easier, cheaper? And there's a lot of benefits, of course, to community. Community is hard to do, but there's a lot of benefits. One of them is leverage. I would assume maybe, I got the chat pane open, so the folks in the room, let me know in the chat pane how many people are on your partner team. Let me know how many people are on your partner team helping to grow your partner programs. My guess is that it's fairly small. If you got a wider network and you're probably wearing multiple hats. Carol says 4 total, 2 coming in. Nice. Glad there's some extra capacity coming in. But the beauty of community is that it helps you generate a lot more leverage in your team. You're switching from a implementation role to a facilitation role and inspiring and educating community members to take on projects and to help grow the community into something of itself. And so you can gain a lot of leverage there. There's also the competitive advantage when you build a really strong community of loyal people who, again, you've built relationships with. It becomes quite a competitive advantage where if there's a new competitor who offers something cheaper, easier, better than maybe your product, there's still a level of value and connection that comes along with the community that I think gets undervalued, and so can help protect against poaching competitors. It also adds additional value to your partner program in general. There's a reason that they sign up. There's an end goal. It's probably, if it's agencies, it's probably how do I grow my agency better with your program? And one way to do that is your software, but I think the most successful partner programs realize that there's many facets that you can help them achieve progress towards growing their agency better. And the software is just one piece of it. And the reality is community and getting those agencies together is another vastly valuable piece to a partner program as well.
And let's do this real quick, Luke. I want to stop you there because you just hit on so many things that I want to make this super actionable for everybody and tie this into a couple things. So like, we need to figure out when we should launch a community. We need to figure out what we should wrap that community around, the purpose, right? It's not about the product. It'd be hard for us all to create a community that's all about, let's talk about the product, but it has to be a purpose behind it. There are pain points that an agency will come into your program with that can become a community in itself, right? If your lead feeder, sales, anything around conversions, lead generation, that could be a community in itself. There's plenty out there, right? The other aspect of this is why they will stay there and why they will come back. So you touched on customer success support as a reason to have a community. You're one person, you're 5 people, maybe you're 11 people, but really tough to supply that level of customer support and just human-to-human interaction that some of the partners need. Having a community allows you to sort of crowdsource some of the needs of the community by leveraging other partners to answer each other's questions, et cetera. We can do that in any platform. Most of us have Slack. But let's talk towards first the litmus test around when is it a good time to start looking at a community. Then let's talk to the different options. And then let's talk to maybe the value of around the purpose. How do we ideate around like, what is the vanity purpose based on our brand? So if we start with back at the beginning with when is it a good time? What's a good litmus test, to launch a community?
Yeah. The reality is probably most of you already have some level of community somewhere. It might not be in a centralized place and you might not have a structured program around it. But if you have folks that are using your product or service, like you probably have some people that are, those are people that are part of your community. So that's like a first thing. But in terms of when do you actively invest in proactive community work and build structure and program around it? It comes back to, and this is, I think, one of the toughest things for folks historically in the community world is to tie it back to first, like the business metric that you're on a company level very focused on, whether that's sales, whether that's retention, whether that's profitability. And so going to those business level metrics and the contributing factors to those business level metrics will help you start narrowing down on the focus of what your community might start with. And so, and where a community might be the right lever to pull to make an impact on one of those. So for example, if one of your business level metrics is retention, and you're seeing that there is an issue with adoption. And so someone buys, they go to start to adopt the platform, And in that 30-day window, you're seeing a huge drop off in the retention rates, right? There's probably some work that you can do from a product perspective. If you go back to your product managers, I'm sure they're thinking about that problem quite a bit, but at the same time, there's also a programmatic way to increase it, adoption. So is that during the first 30 days, and again, this goes back to doing interviews with those folks who dropped off to figure out why, but in those first 30 days, was it because they weren't getting their questions answered? They didn't feel supported. They didn't know how to get help when they needed. They wanted additional examples. You start to tease out some of these friction points that they're running into that's causing them to drop off, and start thinking about, how do we solve that? Well, do we build that internally? Is that something that we can build internally and is easy for us to do? Or is that something that is actually easy for us to facilitate external partners in our partner program to lead the charge on? And so again, there's certain things. Support is a great example of it. I think that's probably where a lot of companies start with, is trying to decrease, like, offset support costs, especially on lower ASP products where they can't necessarily staff a support team, to start thinking about forums and community as a way to offset it. And I think that's like the natural, clear business case. But at the same time, there are plenty of other, when you think of like all the other parts of the flywheel, there's plenty of other places that community can influence. But in terms of support, again, it's like, that's a great opportunity, because if you think about your resellers, all of them have products and services that they sell to your customers. So now you have this kind of like interesting intersection between, these people over here need help and they're calling it a support, or they're running into walls on their, let's say, on activation. You have these other people on this side that have the knowledge, the expertise, the incentive to want to help them overcome their challenge, and then be able to, hopefully, if it's a good relationship, upsell them on ongoing services. And so really, community in this case, in a support context, is a way to marry the two together. So anyway, I think going back to the original question is, like, first, you got to get laser focused on what's in 2021, or if you're planning for 2022, what are the top 3 things that your company is trying to move? And when you look at the contributing factors to that, all the leading indicators to that, like, which one of those things may be a good fit for community? And so you can always put that in the context too of what your team's held accountable for. From there, it's kind of part 1. Then part 2 is assuming that, okay, there's a case in the pain points we're seeing being better solved by community in a more scalable way. Now let's start exploring, what does that community look like? And at that point, you got to put yourself, you basically become a product manager. And so if there's only one takeaway that I give the group who's watching this, is that when you think about community, think of it and treat it like a product, and you're a product manager. And at that point, when you're a product manager, you're on the hook for 2 things. You're on the hook for, 1, being the voice of the customer and solving their pain point, which you can measure through NPS. That's like an easy, common way. You can measure it other ways, but that's a common way. And then secondly, how does that help impact the business enterprise value? So that's going back to that business case. If it's decreased support tickets, that's the metric you're accountable for with your community. And it's this interesting balance, right? Because a lot of people will focus really on, let's try to help support, and kind of miss the mark on actually like solving for value, and vice versa. Sometimes they solve for value and then they can never tie it back to an actual business metric. So all that's to say is that if you go into building a community with the mindset that you're a product manager, and your product you're building is your community, which solves a pain point, and it'll help you start to figure out how to best structure and what content do you put in the community, how do you solve those pain points, because the tools in your product are those events, are those channels, are those conversations, is that education and courses. So I think that's kind of one, when you start to structure out and think about how to put a community in practice, is to put that product manager hat on and treat it as a product. And again, that goes back to how you measure the success of the community, which is kind of like the last thing I'll mention is, if you start with a business metric, you should be able to tie that down to, all right, we're decreasing support tickets. Then you can get into community engagement metrics like weekly active users, which is a really common one, of course, with SaaS. I'm sure many of your SaaS companies are measuring and keeping an eye on weekly active users. You can look at retention curves. You can look at user-generated content as an indication of engagement. Are users posting their own content, and is the community taking a life of its own versus your team having to like continue to be the ones pushing the community forward? And then satisfaction, like would they recommend it to other folks? So those are like the first entry points to getting started with a community. And then at a certain point, the last thing I'll say is you also need to take your product manager hat off and put on your product marketing manager hat and think about what's the value of joining this community. This goes back to Alex's point, which is on purpose. It's like, why does this community exist and why should anyone care about it? And what kind of world are you trying to create? And sometimes that's going to be very lofty and inspirational depending on the purpose of it. And sometimes that's going to be very straightforward and practical, like solving, like we're going to help you get started on our SaaS platform in the next 60 days and see your first, whatever it is, first like conversion event or first success metric. But that's kind of like, what's the purpose of the community? And then what is the purpose? What is the incentive or what's in it for me for those folks participating? So if you have agencies involved, like what's in it for them for participating? How is participating going to help them grow their agency better, faster, easier than not participating? And so that starts to give you some clear idea on like how you position it, the value props you talk about, both to your partner side of it, but also to your customer side. And then eventually you can get into more tactical stuff, which is like incentives and driving engagement. So
I'll
a lot there, but
yeah, no, that was good. I'm watching the poll too. We're about 25% on all the answers. So everybody's spread out. Looks like everybody has a different sort of view on community. But the way I look at this from someone who has to run, I have 2 communities and a Slack group. So I obviously have to create this kind of flywheel effect for making sure I can support a community, or else I wouldn't be able to do it. And the way I thought about this is you can think about the 3 components that you as the partner team, as the SaaS in general, have to have. You have to have training for your partners. That has to be housed somewhere. Some of us are very early on just exchanging docs via email. Some of us may have Guru exchanging docs there, some of us in Notion, some of us above that in Thinkific or Teachable and have an LMS. The other side of that is you do have to have that day-to-day communication channel, Slack, etc. Now, the community word is kind of a convoluted word, and most people associate that to a news feed with a little bit of chat and engagement and upvoting or whatever, however you picture community, right? But the way I interpret it is I want somewhere that I can onboard my partners, I can train and develop them, they can get crowdsourced support and feel like they're in a network, and I can chat them one-to-one if I want. And I want to be able to house some level of documentation so that when they onboard, it's not onboarding through email, it's not onboarding through docs exchange. The first thing they do is jump into the community, and then they get everything they need there. And they slowly start participating by way of its onboarding, right? So now they're onboarding into the product, into the partnership, but they're doing it through this community channel. Then the community channel becomes a part of things that you already have to do. So instead of thinking about it like deprecating Slack versus Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, a key.org over there, Thinkific LMS over there, think about, well, how can I make this somewhere where they can go to get everything they need to do and go ahead and talk to each other and become closer associated with my my partner program and my brand. My camera's fuzzing out on me. Anyways, that's the way I think about it. So the next thing is like, okay, let's talk about like the different platforms. Let's talk about what you should be looking at that's relevant right now for partner teams and founders, some people in here that are looking at putting everything into a couple of tools, as few as possible, but having a community component, having that chat, having that LMS component. What do you recommend people do? Where do you send people? What are some of the tools that you like to be in?
One last note on that previous topic, and then I'll talk about the technology side of it, is to the question of like, when are you ready? Part of it is like when you are ready to actually invest in a community. Because I think that's one place that a lot of folks misstep, is that they're like, oh, we'll build it. We'll just put it up and people will come. And we'll like funnel people there and it'll just take a life of its own. But community, to do it right, takes some active investment. And so just like the amount of, I would equate it to the amount of time and energy it takes to do a legit blogging strategy plus social. It's kind of like that time range of, we're going to launch a blog, we're going to invest in social. That amount of time and energy and resources is when you will be ready to do a community. So I kind of keep that in mind. And whether that resourcing shifts from somewhere where, you know, you have a support come in and a portion of support's time is dedicated to the community, and you pull that time from other places, or whether it's coming directly from your team. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because I think that's one of the missteps is folks jump the gun, they launch it, and then they don't have the time to really invest in helping the community take a life of its own. So there's that. Technology wise, I think the first thing to consider when you think about technology is, again, it goes back to understanding who these folks are that are participating in the community. And that may first influence the list of options that you want to have. There are certain clear community areas where, for example, the developer community, developers will have a very clear set of community tools that they do and do not want to interact with. Versus someone who's like a marketer versus if it's B2C. And so obviously going back to your original personas and seeing where they're interacting and how they're interacting today will help influence, again, just like technology choices. So that's kind of step one. Step number two, again, going back to the purpose of why you have a community and thinking about what are the goals of that community? What are the like tangible things that you need that community to do to get to those goals? And then backing your way into a technology solution that has that. So kind of what you were talking about, Alex, where it's like, okay, we want to have chat. We want to have the ability to post questions and answer questions. We want to have the ability to host training and education. We want to be able to have like an onboarding experience. Those are probably some of the most common ingredients. But again, I would start with goal of the community, the features and functionality you need to have in order to best achieve those goals, and then back your way into, okay, this platform or this set of tools it checks the boxes on all of those. And, reality, there's a lot of tools that it's tough to find everything all in one tool. And that's kind of one of the thorns in my side is I built out a number of communities in my past and built a number of programs in my past that I always felt where I'd have such a disjointed system, a kind of a duct taped and glued system of you go over here for the training, you go over here for the community, you go over here for the onboarding. And so I think to Alex's point, we want a centralized place that's like the go-to place to just get everything they need to onboard and be successful. And so the more consolidated you're able to put this, even if you have to make some concessions on like very specific features, I think you'll end up netting out better engagement activity the more consolidated you have it. And the more streamlined the experience is going to be. The other thing that is worth thinking about is, again, going back to business metrics, you're on the hook. If you're investing time and energy on here, you're on the hook to show the impact of your community efforts. And so you also want to choose a technology that directly integrates and links back to whatever system of record you're using for business performance, probably your CRM. And so that's where you get into these worlds of Facebook. And what I ran into when I was building out communities, a world of Facebook, not giving access to that sort of stuff, and in Slack, if you're on a free community, you have limited access to that. And so it can be very fuzzy, hand wavy when you try to tie back in some of these communities to the core business metric you're trying to influence. And so when you're going through your technology selection, again, as a business, you want to make sure that you have some way to tie that back and flag folks in your CRM who are active in your community, and then be able to do all your reporting through there. So there's a number of tools now that allow you to layer that on top, or you can pick a community platform that has integration options to do that. But that's the other thing I think a lot of folks struggle with, is reporting back on the progress of it. The other thing is it again depends on the mix of what you want to all bring together. So you also want to look at what are you doing today that are activating your existing partners. Are you running meetups? Do you have like a user program? Do you have do you run events? Do you have like certifications and training? Do you have documentation? And this can be an opportunity, again, to think about, you have these things maybe already created, but they're in disjointed places. can we use this as an opportunity to pull them together? So finding a platform that supports many of those different use cases and pulls them all into one place versus requiring your partners to jump all around.
Yeah, and I'll just show this because that's a perfect point. So if I were thinking about this from a partner lead role, I would think about it like, well, first we got to figure out where everyone is and what is happening, because we have people in Slack, we have people in LinkedIn, we have people in our newsletter, we have people in a Facebook group, we have people, I don't know, wherever it is, right? These two products right here, Jeff mentioned one, Orbit, definitely more developer centric, but still really good. An easy place to start. ComSoar is another one. Check these out. But the first thing is to get a bead on where everyone's at in your entire ecosystem. So you tie in the different channels and you say, okay, well, Monica's in these different channels. She's a high contributing member of my partner program. And it looks like she's a little spread out, but she's active, right? Then there's people that aren't active in most of the channels. They're only in Slack. And you kind of get a feel for what's going on. And you can use this to get a basis for whether or not it's time to kind of bring everyone together is the way I would look at this. That's a good option to start. The other thing that we want to mention here is when you're building your partner program, you're going to start adding technology as you grow, or you're going to get in these situations. We're in it too. It's like, we can decide to add a new technology that forces our partners to go and log into a new system, to go somewhere else to do something. And then all of a sudden you think about how many different URLs your partners have to go to just to get something done inside your program. That can become chaotic in itself. Some of us are really good at it. Some of us we know are not. It's just a matter of like how you're layering on, how you're building that cake of like your partnership stack and where you're forcing people to go. So that's why I mentioned some of the consolidated efforts to say, hey guys, like we're in Slack now, but we're about to add another 100 people. We're about to launch a certification. That's a perfect time to start thinking about community. We're about to do something bigger that's going to bring a lot more attention to our program. I always suggest at those big inflection points, that's when you start looking at a platform, a community, call it whatever you want, just a consolidation of your stack and your systems so that you can take advantage of those big things that are coming and not let those people bounce in and out, not let them come into that event and then leave and maybe come back to another one in the future, maybe not, right? Consolidate them, get them somewhere, and make sure you do have the bandwidth person to own it to an extent. But I'll let you talk about that real quick. And I've got a truck outside, so I'm going to mute.
So we talked about reporting and being smart about that. We talked about all-in-one and consolidating where it makes sense. I think the other two that I want that I struggled with as I started to build this out in the programs is, one, there's a ton of great content, a ton of great conversation. Some of that, yes, should be, we can split it with private, and some of that we may want to make discoverable, right? Especially in the case where it's a support. Like there's people Googling like questions, and we want to make sure that that stuff can be easily found. So the third kind of consideration when you're choosing platforms is the discoverability of this content. And again, what level of discoverability does it have for resurfacing content within the private areas, like for a member who searches, and what areas do we want discoverability to actually the general public? And the reason that's important is, again, your choice in platform is going to be very different. In Slack, it's a completely closed solution. So there's no ability to surface any publicly facing Googleable type of content. And so that can influence whether or not that technology is a good choice. If you have private content, again, like if you look at options like Facebook, which is a very common one, the searching for previous, like I'm like, man, we were talking about this like 6 months ago, and I know someone posted a link and it's just impossible to find. Things just get lost in the feed. So all that's to say is spend some time, again, based off of the type of community and the goal, to figure out what kind of discoverability options do you want with this content so that it has some legs, it's a little more evergreen and people can find it again, and use that as a way to influence like whether your choice. And then what was the third one? What was the last one? Now I'm forgetting. Reporting, discoverability,
The
consolidation.
Yeah, the content side of things. Is that what you want to talk about? Well, I'll say this. Think about it for a sec. There are three main options, everyone. If you are looking at a platform that consolidates events, LMS, and allows you to do that community feel, that gamification type feel. Circle's new, pros and cons. Con is new. They're still sort of kind of figuring a lot of things out. It's good. I've heard great things, but they are new. Pro, it's a little bit less expensive than Mighty Networks. It does white label. It allows for enough members. It's got, I think, the necessary API integrations, or at least the necessary apps. I use Zapier. I use Slack for my community. It works great. Mighty Networks, this is what ours is built on. It has all the same stuff as Circle, but I believe they do something just a little bit better around the LMS side of things, around the training. So I can have courses that you have to take certain classes before you can progress to the other one. It's great. I love it. It is a little pricey. Key, have to mention Key, of course. The reason we're looking into Key is because not only is it built by HubSpotters, it is something that is meant for creating. You can, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's meant to kind of put yourself into this global conversation of like, there's a lot going on. You can't steal everybody's attention forever. Everyone's going to want to go to different places. Key is almost like the city where all of these agency creators are going to be living, and they can pop into different sub buildings, for different niches that they want to get into, where your key would be related to that niche, right? Something that you can capture attention on. And Key has some awesome features that allow you to do training, allow you to do community, allow you to do communication, and everything else. So those three options, again, Circle, Mighty Networks, and Key are the ones that we found. There are others out there, but those are the ones that we really look closely into. And yeah, anything else that I missed on that?
No, other than right now, Key is in private beta. So anyone who's interested in checking it out, you can sign up for a private beta, and I can hop on a call and help walk you through it. But we're not open for all communities all the time right now. But if there's a use case and it makes sense, we'd love to work with you on it. I guess the other thing is that it is distinctly separate. I do live the Superman Clark Kent life of living on both worlds, of HubSpot and Key, but it is a completely separate product from HubSpot. So it does have a HubSpot integration, but it is separate.
And your partner's Digital 22, his agency, a Vidyard partner.
Two co-founders are Ricky and Mark from Digital 22. It's like a 50-person agency out in the UK, and so they have a expertise in building courses and community and content and marketing, and so they're taking that angle to as we build this out and build out our own training and our own help for folks that are building community. They're helping me in that journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly a really solid factor that's in your favor for partnerships. That's why I reached out to you and wanted to get you in here, because you guys are agencies, you guys are partners of SaaS, you guys are building community with your peers. I'm sure you've got friends of yours, other agency owners launching keys and experimenting as well. So I believe that ecosystem is going to become super valuable for the agencies to be involved, which ipso facto makes it valuable for the tech teams. But you guys are going to obviously buffer that a lot. You're not going to just let tech teams bombard on Key. But I think if you let the right people in with the right community idea that can facilitate it, it can be valuable for both parties. So let me just go through this one more time just to make sure I got all of our stuff answered. But think about that third option that you were talking about. So the main things that we believe that most people are in the main buckets. You're too small. You need to justify a community, or too small to justify a community, right? You don't think you have enough partners, enough traction. My answer to that is don't think about it as a community where people have to be in there engaging every day and talking to each other and all that stuff. Think about it as a cake, right? The first layer may be training. You have to train your partners, build the community after training, but put it all in one place. Start there. Okay, well, we use Slack and our agencies like it. Great. I keep my Slack. I've got community and Slack. What I suggest partner teams do with Slack is keep your best active partners, those ones you're co-marketing, co-selling with, the ones that you're super actively involved with, in Slack. Move the bulk over to a community, move everyone to a community, but just keep Slack less noisy. People deal with a lot of Slack noise. Keep Slack limited to maybe your top 50 partners, something like that. Number three, we believe we can support one, can support one, and need to know what the best options are. Those are the options: Key, Mighty Network, Circle. Obviously, you can stay in Slack if you're going to stay small and you don't need LMS and training and all that stuff. But if you need training, LMS, events, look at these consolidated options. We know the value, but unsure of the costs and risks. Let's end on this: costs and risks. So I know how much time that I spend, but I have a really good system where it's content is being created, it's being housed here. I crowdsource events from thought leaders like you. So the system works. And I spend maybe 2 hours a day keeping the communities, both of them, up to speed. So an hour a day is what I spend. But cost for me, it's $100 for each of my communities, $100 a month. So $200 a month are my costs. But talk to me about how you kind of approach the costs and the bandwidth, and how you have that conversation with people.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, you hit the nail on the head on cost. It's technology wise, it's pretty cheap, which is pretty rad that we live in a day and age where it's easy to like gather people together and put all this into one spot, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg like it used to a couple of years ago. I think it's more, again, I think it's the time commitment is probably more where I would say is the cost. And when I say a cost, I would say more investment. And it could be an investment again, and that cost, that time doesn't necessarily have to land on your plate. So keep that in mind. Like really one of the superpowers that community managers build, one of the muscles they grow is being world-class facilitators and facilitating other people. And so could you look within your company of things that are already happening that people are kind of running into problems with? Again, like support's trying to figure this part of it out. They're running events, but they're kind of like, we don't know how to like communicate well to our events. And could some of that be pulled in as ways to engage the community and just centralize it? Are there things that you can invest? Like, again, to your point, Alex, like the time commitment, I would put it on par with running a blog and running social. It's probably 2 hours a day that you're investing in there. Could obviously be more, but I would say a minimum of 2 hours a day to build some traction. And again, it's what is going back to the community value and why people are joining, like, and what business impact it has. You know, the cost itself can be like very minimal, assuming that you get the leverage out of it. When you think of just how many support cases you could deflect, or how much sales you could generate, or how many leads you could generate from it. But so as long as you can tie it back again to a business case, I think it can be very, very clear, as long as you have the investment, very clear on why you can gain leverage from a community to hit that, assuming that you can invest the time and energy.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that is super important. So if you really did a little bit of strategy around what's happening on the social side of things, what's happening on the event side of things, what's happening on the LMS side of things, what I think you'll find, and onboarding, biggest one, onboarding. So if you're sitting there dealing with an onboarding process that involves a bunch of emails and document exchange over here, and then having to log into Google Drive or Notion or Guru, and then you have other stuff that they have to go off and do, it becomes time suck, convoluted, and also people will not make it through as much of your onboarding. The other aspect of that is, if you're trying to promote events, instead of thinking about events like, hey, I got to create an Eventbrite landing page, I got to drive all this traffic there, and it's one and done, and then they enter our newsletter, maybe not, and then it's on to the next. Imagine if you had an events section of your community that allowed you to bring all the traffic there, and they can RSVP to that event, but maybe the next one's also interesting for them. And then while they're in there, why not poke around at some of the other things in your community? So don't think about it like it's this brand new thing. Think about it like, I can take the things that I'm doing in onboarding and training and docs exchange and promotions, events, and house it in one place. Figure out where you can get all that done, And man, you may be saving yourself a ton of time and getting a lot more traction and engagement and analytics out of it. I show my analytics, but I can't show that. It's a little too private, but we get detailed analytics on top producers, engagement, the percentage of total members to engaged members, growth, of course, times of day that people are in. The analytics alone are worth it, you know? So
100% agree.
Anything else that we missed that you want to go over? I mean, let's make sure we hit the bullets at least. I don't think I was even looking at our bullets.
I got two good resources for anyone who wants to dive a little bit deeper. The first one is there is a community about communities called CMX. Anyone involved in CMX, let me know in the chat if you've done it, but it is a community for community members. They do all kinds of amazing content on running communities. They do events, they have their own communities, and they do like a state of community report every year. So there's a ton of great resources there to help you get started, but also to learn a little bit more. And then putting community in the context of a business, there is a new, some of you may be very familiar with Wes's product-led growth. There's a new community-led growth, which is by a collection of companies that are getting together, kind of led by some of the folks.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, some of the folks we mentioned earlier. So it's just a good framework to kind of start thinking about community. I think I really love, the stuff that they're talking about and how it can help companies grow. So this can be another, again, resource for you as you start to dive into this. I want to make sure I share those too.
Very cool. Yeah. And I think every platform that has, that's a community platform, they have their own free stuff that you can get into. This one's cool. I haven't seen this one, powered by Bevy. Interesting.
So CMX was its own thing for a long time, and they were just training and education for community managers. And then they got acquired by Bevy, which is essentially like an event management system.
Yeah.
So they have like a platform that does like events, but yeah, they have a ton of good content. And David, the founder of CMX, just launched a book, which is, I'm sure, on here somewhere. So there's just a lot of great stuff. If you dive in, when you start really diving into like, okay, now we're ready to invest on a community. What's the strategy? How do we structure it? Like, they have such good resources. So I want to make sure everyone had that in their back pocket.
Nice. Yeah. If you, I'm going to poke around for that book. I'll try to post, but so end to end, I mean, unless anyone has any specific questions for Luke while we've got him, think about some questions, but I think to put wheels to the ground, so to speak, when you're talking to your higher ups, when you're talking to your team about whether or not community is right for you, I stress the biggest thing is don't think about it like, man, we've got to create this community and we've got to post all the time. We've got to do all this stuff in there and it's going to be a time suck. And what if they don't show up? And don't think about it like that. Think about it again like a cake. Figure out what your first layer is, figure out if it's events, start there. Figure out if it's training and onboarding, start there. Certification, start there. Find a platform that allows you to add those community layers and just go one layer at a time. And it's not about creating a community so much as for you as the operators, it's about consolidation and making sure that your operations are refined in a way that's user friendly, that people enjoy. I don't want to see a bunch of Notion links and Google Drive documents in an email thread. I want to see a community UI with pictures of people that I know and things going on. And, that's what I want to see. So put me in there. I'll do the courses. I'll post a little intro to myself in the feed. And eventually it will become something that you can call a community, but don't think about it like I got to sell a community to my board or my team,
Yeah. Yeah, what you're selling, again, putting your product manager hat on, what you're selling is the two sides of it. The side is, how is it going to help provide a better experience for our partners and our customers, and than what we're doing today, and how is it going to make a bigger impact on the business, or in this case, like as Alex was saying, like actually solve and make us more efficient, whether that's support tickets, whether that's time on events. So like those are your two levers, and like that's how you position whether or not you should move forward with it. And then again, a lot of that will be just consolidating stuff that you're already doing.
Huge, man. I love it. Thank you very much for the resources. I'm going to check those out. I need a new book. So I like this whole community stuff. I read one, it's not back there, but I'll share a link to that too, in the community. So collective.partnerprograms.io. Everybody jump back in there and we can chat about this there. And Luke, man, you've been awesome. Congrats on key.org. It looks super fantastic and all the success. And we'll see you a lot, I'm sure, in the in the coming months.
I appreciate you all having me. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We can include my email. Otherwise, I'll be in the community as well. So you can always reach out to me there.
Awesome, buddy. Thanks again, guys.
All right.
Take care.